Welcome back to Qualitative Research. Today we're going to talk about creating protocols. I am your host, Dr. June Gothberg, and this may be one of the most important lectures that I give to you. I strongly feel, firmly have experienced that your protocol really drives the quality of the data that you can collect and the ability to answer your research questions. As you move forward with your final prospectus for your qualitative study, you will need to include your protocols for every piece of data collection that you are proposing in your appendices. This is not just something that I want. This is a requirement from the WMU IRB. So I get asked a lot by students, do I really need a protocol? My answer is yes, yes, and yes. Protocols increase the integrity of your data collection and your data collection process. Protocols offer the opportunity for others to replicate your study, which is very important in qualitative research when we tend to have small numbers of participants and you want to have a chance for your research findings to be generalized, then you need to offer the opportunity for other researchers to replicate your study. Protocols provide you, as the researcher, a roadmap through your entire data collection process. And then finally, as I've already shared, IRB requires that you share your data collection instruments before you can be approved to begin your study. I've included a screenshot of the web page that shows you that when you apply for IRB, you must include your instruments, which is also known as protocols for qualitative. So while we've been spending the semester learning that the researcher is the instrument in qualitative inquiry, you still need to think about your instrumentation. That is your protocols. Often I get asked what is required and how scripted does my protocol need to be. Here's a few things to think about. As a veteran researcher, I still script out everything for interviews and focus groups, even the probes, even when it's not a highly structured interview or focus group. As a veteran researcher, I still create very detailed observation guides, checklists, guided field notes. As a veteran researcher, I still use a rubric for document analysis, and I make sure that that rubric can meet the criteria for inter-rater or inter-coder reliability for a team. In other words, I use specific data entry, data collection, data documentation, and data reflection instruments every time I conduct research. Here's an example of one of my protocols. I have shared this with you in the content area as an example under the helpful handouts. You are welcome to use my scripts for my protocols, adapt them, adopt them for your own studies. But you can see here on every page of my protocol, there is a section for what I intend to cover during that piece of the interview or focus group in this instance. And not only that, I also show approximately how much time I believe this is going to take. How do you know how much time it's going to take? By practicing and piloting your protocols. You can also see that I try to create buy-in right from the beginning. This particular interview or focus group may not benefit the actual participant. However, if you can share with the participant how you're going to use your findings and how they can make positive change happen, you are much more likely to create that relationship early on and get their buy-in. I also have some bulleted points down here that I almost always include. These bullets happen to be for a focus group. So in a focus group, there's multiple people. I always make sure to let them know that I'm very interested in everyone's point of view and that it's okay to have different opinions. I also say in a focus group, it's important that you don't speak at the same time, so I can make sure to hear each of you. And I often refer to sidebar conversations because that can create disaster in a focus group setting. In either an interview or focus group setting, I always ask them to make sure to say what they think, not what they think I want to hear. And then I tell them that I need to audio record it, and I give them some reasons. You can see here the reasons that I gave, but then I also ensure that when I transcribe them, I will take out any identifiable information and that it will remain anonymous. So here's just a cute little cartoon that I got from Chris Leisky at freshspectrum.org. I have a subscription, and so I am allowed to share his cartoons. He creates them for evaluation work and for researchers. And you can see here, attention passengers, this is your captain speaking. There's some bad storms ahead, but we're not going to go around them for fear of introducing bias. That's just a little prompt to help you think about how bias may play a role in creating your protocol. Some things to think about when you're trying to avoid this is think about your questions. Why are you asking them? Why is this particular question important? What's the problem? And then I'd also say, how does it tie into your research question? There are several types of questions that you need to make certain you avoid. And so I'm going to go over each of these and give you some examples in the next few slides. First you need to avoid suggestive questions. And these are questions that are phrased to suggest that a certain answer should be given. Here's a few examples and not examples, meaning don't do this. So some intuitive examples are, don't you think that was wrong to do? Or, you understand, right? Or, you did do preventative training, or am I wrong? Some that might be less intuitive, but are still suggestive are, you implemented that program? You bought that curriculum? You believed what he said? And a lot of it has to do with your tone of voice or your inflection. But those are some examples of questions that the way that you say them and the way you phrase them, the participant's going to feel like they must give a certain response. The second type of question to avoid is a leading question. And a leading question is a question which is subtle, but it prompts the respondent to answer in a particular way. So kind of like the previous one, but it's subtle. Here's some examples, meaning these are ones you don't want to do. Do students have increased behavior issues after lunch? Have you stopped giving critical feedback? Weren't you at the Women's March on Saturday? Isn't it true that you made a compromise at work? Do you still hate your kids? All of those are leading questions that prompt the respondent to answer your question in a certain way. Another type of question is a loaded question. A loaded question contains an accusation or unjustified assumption. Answering the question directly makes it appear that a target has accepted that accusation or that assumption. As such, a loaded question, you can think of it as a trap. The safe response to a loaded question is to challenge its assumptions. Here are some examples of loaded questions. And again, these are things you don't want to do in your protocols. Are you planning to resign before you are fired? Has your administrator noticed you can't control your class? Western Michigan University is #1 in the nation for Ph.D. programs in psychology. Which university do you plan to attend? Many say Brainiest Hospital does not provide high quality care to its patients. What is your impression of Brainiest Hospital? All of those are loaded questions and are a trap for your participant. Don't do this. Finally, and this is the one I run into a lot, especially with novices, but not always. Sometimes I run into this with people that are quite advanced in the field in research, but you need to avoid double-barreled questions. There is no win for the participant in a double-barreled question. As the name implies, a double-barreled question asks about two topics in one question, which can lead to issues of interpretation, as you're not sure if the person is responding to the first question or the second question or both. So here's some examples, some intuitive and less intuitive. Again, you don't want to have your questions sound like this. The intuitive are, was the workshop held at a convenient time and location? How is a respondent supposed to respond if it was a convenient time or it was a bad location? What if it was an inconvenient time, but it was a great location? Second intuitive, how satisfied are you with your pay and working conditions? You can see the "and" makes it very intuitive that this is a double-barreled question. Some different questions that are less intuitive, but they're still double-barreled. Do you consider being Amish to be a religious choice or a lifestyle choice? In the past month, have you ever tried to reduce the rate of unintentional injuries by conducting injury prevention workshops? Those are examples of less intuitive double-barreled questions. So let's look at how do we avoid using these 4 types of questions: double-barreled, suggestive, loaded, and leading. First, prior to writing your questions, I would encourage you to do a brainstorm to list the precise topics that you want to gain understanding about. You can do this by brainstorming a decision tree from what you think you know and what you want to know. This is a decision tree that I downloaded from the link below, but the overall research question is how do merged technical companies become commercially viable? You can see in their brainstorm, they have 5 areas that merged out of that, and those can be broken into hard skill issues and soft skill issues. And then that can lead to these more open-ended questions of, do they have a skills gap? Is there a skills mismatch between role and employee, and so forth? From there, then you would start working out your protocol script. So these questions don't necessarily fit well into your protocol, but they help you think about what are the questions you need to ask in your protocol. Some other ways to avoid using these 4 types of questions is, first, know your participants. Maybe you won't know them personally, but you'll know about them, you'll know their context, you'll know what your inclusion criteria are. Prepare for those participants. Second, keep it simple and intuitive. Avoid complicated phrasing. Using simple words help identify the topic of question. And here is a trick for making sure that it's simple. And that is, if you are creating something in Microsoft Word for your protocol, there's a very easy way to look at your word processing program and rate the ease of readability. A tip from the field, and actually it's a research-based practice, is to make sure that your protocol questions stay within a 4th to 6th grade reading level. If you're not using Microsoft Word, I've included a website here that you can use to copy paste your text and get these scores. So here is how to check your reading levels in a Word document. You will open up the options for your Word settings, and you will look under the grammar section and you will select show readability statistics. When you've done that and you do a grammar check on your document, here is what you will see. You will see at the bottom the readability. It'll give you the number of passive sentences. It'll give you a flesh reading ease score. And here's the formulas. I've given you the formulas so that you can understand what goes into a flesh reading ease score. And then a flesh Kincaid grade level. As you can see, this particular check shows an 11th grade, 8th month level for the reading. That is much too high for the general population. So beyond that, we've talked about know your participants and prepare, keeping it simple, intuitive, and avoiding those complicated phrases. Also avoid too much noise for your visuals. You may enjoy fancy fonts, backgrounds, and graphics, but often the best tools are simple black and white. Know that if there's anything visual that you're using in the United States, there are about 8% of people with low vision, besides people with low vision, there's about 8% of males in the United States who are colorblind. And that makes it extremely difficult to read anything outside of simple black and white. My other tip for avoiding these is to use multiple means for understanding. So you may want to use pictorial responses. These can be in smiles and frowns or actual pictures of activities. You can offer materials, handouts, and presentations in a variety of formats. You can think about using an advanced organizer. These tend to be a little beyond what students think about going into a setting. But if you're going into a setting where you don't personally know your participants, you need to think about these different types of aspects. So I had an opportunity to conduct focus groups with students with disabilities. I did not know what I was walking into, but I do know that we have high populations of students who have autism. And so ahead of time, I went through my protocol, and you can see this introduction, 10 minutes, matches my protocol I showed you earlier with 10 minutes. And what I did is I created this visual outline for any student to use. I gave it to all the students to have in their hand so that they would know what to expect out of this focus group and about how much time it would take. For those students that ended up participating with autism, this really eased the stress for them. They were able to look at the clock and keep time and figure out how long each section was going to take and about what time they would be able to leave. Now that said, once you've given this to your participants, you need to ensure that you're following the schedule. Some good advice from Qualtrics. At Western, you have the opportunity to have a free Qualtrics account. So many students are becoming very familiar with Qualtrics. They have some great advice on their webpage about how to make good survey questions. Guess what? When you're creating good survey questions, those are also really good ideas to follow when you're creating interview questions, when you're creating focus group questions. So you can see here that they have 7 points highlighted. Keep it simple, make it specific, keep it individual, make it exhaustive, have options, be neutral, and be balanced. We're going to look at a couple of these a little more in depth. So from that, you can see that they follow the principles called NICE. NICE. NICE is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive principle. So when you think about mutually exclusive, this ensures each question is independent of each other and that you gain as much data and insights during your data collection as possible. As you write your questions, think about, do my questions overlap? Am I asking the same thing? Secondly, collectively exhaustive. The second principle ensures that all answers give coverage to the entire realm of possible answers to the greatest extent possible. In qualitative research, this is where you get your deepest insights. So you need to think about, am I covering all possible answers or positions that answer my research question? Remember, always tie it back to your research question. And what is missing? I will tell you, and I have it in bold, pilot testing is the best way to ensure NICE. So finally, these are the last 2 slides. Here are some things to avoid these 4 types of questions in a nutshell. Be concise, be brief, short, to the point, not wordy, not going on with endless explanations or elaborate definitions that take time to read or hear. Pay attention to conjunctions such as and or. They can be a red flag. Review and practice. I can't emphasize this enough. Ask colleagues to review a working draft, specifically looking for double-barreled or other types of design problems. Test your protocol, and then practice, practice, practice. I still, to this day, practice my scripts every time before I go into any kind of situation with participants. So I hope that helps you as you're building your protocols for your final prospectus. Please let me know if you have any questions or if you would like me to take a look at something before your final paper is due.